Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
Speed was important, but reliability was more important. Knowing when it's going to get there allows the customer to plan ahead on their supply chain and say, if I know it's going to be 20 days or 40 days or 60 days, it's reliable, I can manage my POs, I can manage my cash flow according to reliability.
Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. We are super excited today. We are, for the first time, in person, so those watching on YouTube, this is the first time we're in the same room, and we're joined with our guest, Steve, from Flexport, and super excited to have Steve. I think he joined Flexport about 18 months ago. He has a great background in all things logistics. He spent some time at Amazon, Pitney Bowes, Border Free, Canadian Post, maybe just to name a few. So Steve, great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you.
As a way of getting started, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey in logistics.
Sure. Thanks for having me to your
Absolutely.
Your first in-person.
Exactly.
Man. Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been in cross-border e-commerce for a lot longer than I'd like to say, but 22 years now, right?
All right. Part of the club, the 20-plus club.
It's crazy.
I'm under 20. I
know you are. You remind me like every day.
I'm not that old.
We'll have a party when you hit 20.
We'll welcome you to the club.
So, when we started Border Free back in 99, 2000, I mean, people weren't even banking online. They weren't buying online.
Yeah, right.
Most people didn't even have like credit cards like that weren't able to unlock. They were using internet at work, right?
Yeah.
So, right idea, certainly right idea, just at the wrong time. So one of those kinds of things. But I did that for 10 years, and that was fantastic. And I got really hooked on just the whole cross-border e-commerce. And that was mostly on the B2B or B2C side. I spent, 10 years doing the Border Free thing. And then I moved to Pitney Bowes, where we built the cross-border e-commerce business. So that was a great experience. We built the eBay Global Shipping program, which was, cross-border at scale for an eBay seller base that was just a bunch of SMBs and selling everything. So, in order to make the business scale, we had to really, really invent a lot of really cool technologies around customs and duty and tax calculations to operate in a real-time environment that had never been done before. So now you see a lot of companies doing this, taking this to market right now that are kind of reinventing what we did back in 2012. So, really cool, really great experience. But I always felt that we were never going to be as good as Amazon. There was something about the Amazon effect that I just couldn't get,
those guys,
I just couldn't put my finger on it. They just always seemed to be one step ahead. So I decided to do that for 5.5 years. So I joined the Amazon Global Logistics company or business. So I was the first person in AGL, and then a bunch of great people joined after that. I think we were at a couple thousand people by the end. So I joined that in 2016. So that was
Did you move to Seattle?
I didn't.
Okay.
I did that from Toronto. So, it's one of those, if you're at head office, you're at head office. And if you're not, you're working twice as hard. But I've been working from home for a long time now. So when the pandemic hit, I was kind of ready for it.
You were ready, yeah.
But no, that was a great experience. Amazon was just real boot camp. Every element of it was just really great for my understanding and appreciation how to build technology, how to optimize processes, how to manage defect, and it was just such a great experience. So we did B2C exports, rebuilt a lot of the operations and tech associated with all global exports.
Okay.
And then we also ran imports. So all the FBA programs and retail programs bringing in from China and other countries. AGL, Global Logistics, was responsible for bringing a lot of that into the FCs, Amazon FCs and cross-docks, as well as, managing all the marketplace export volume as well. So just really great way of polishing. I did a lot of B2C. It was wonderful adding the B2B context. And I always felt, why is B2C so hard? And it's because I never really understood the B2B. So I spent a few years doing that. And now I'm at Flexport. Flexport's been great, a year and a half in. Just it's like 100% match for what I want and what I wanted. So, I came in, Ryan and crew were so great. We created this little new product development organization. We boot camped a bunch of new products, really geared towards SMB e-commerce sellers.
Okay.
And so I've been doing that for a year and a half. We built a product called Flow Direct, which helps e-commerce sellers move their inventory into US FCs, got really tight with a lot of fulfillment companies in the US and with Shopify, and we've got a couple hundred customers on board.
Amazing.
And, I just got a real empathy for SMBs after the eBay program, and you just kind of see that there are regular people who, not everyone can work for a big company. right? It's like
that's
people
right.
want to be
I agree.
entrepreneurs and kind of carve their own path and develop their own capabilities and specialties. So you drive this like real relationship empathy with SMBs, and I'm back at it now. So
Love it.
Yeah, Flexport's been great.
There's so much to unpack over there, right? Like, first of all, the Canadian, right? Like, the second part, Pitney Bowes. I just want to mention something. Like, in my career, I've recognized something is the amount of leaders, right? Like, people say PayPal mafia. I almost feel like ex-Pitney Bowes people from its like peak days, I would assume, right? Like at that point, have gone out in the industry and they sit in some serious leadership position, charting the path for where things go. Of course, there is Amazon leadership without a question. Amazon's doing things that no one's even thinking about, or they have the wherewithal to be able to pull that off. But there is that Pitney Bowes aspect that is not talked about as much in the industry. That I feel, right? Like, do you get that sense? Like, I'm literally saying this based on my observation. I could be incorrect, but I just get a feeling that there is a lot of leaders out in the market in the innovation product space that came from Pitney.
I mean, Pitney, in the 80s, Pitney was Google.
Right. For mailing, right? I mean, if you had mailing equipment at your business, it was Pitney Bowes.
And, I remember my first tour of one of the facilities, I don't want to geek out on it because I'm not a mail geek, but, these were machines in the 70s that were shooting paper through printing machines, and the ink was being sprayed on the paper at a velocity and at an angle, so as the paper is coming through, it would render as a proper stamp. And then they were measuring your dispenses on the amount of ink that you would throw onto a paper instead of using stamps. And this is mechanical.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, huge, really great innovation. So I can see where that created a culture, and then the culture kind of spread around. And it's still there. The innovation culture is still there. It's an old company. It's like really, really old. So it's one of the first few companies on the stock market, and they're still around, and there's a reason why.
That is extremely impressive, right? And the second part that you spoke about, right? Like this journey, and I find it really exciting as well, as learning from, right? Like, so if you look at my background, building large distribution footprint environments, and just like, listen, the money's good. When you do that, when you're working Fortune 100, Fortune 500, you are in there. And I used to be a consultant, right? Like, the money's good, it's fun, but the true satisfaction that you get from your job is actually addressing the mid-market, taking all of those learnings and saying, okay, how am I going to do this again? Like, if you look at my journey or Dan's journey, right? Like building FedEx fulfillment. And I draw that to what you do today, right? Like, where you are taking all of that experience, right? Amazon, of course, did it for merchants, but Amazon was doing it for itself, right? Like, and Pitney was dealing with, from a cross-border standpoint, at a much greater level, trying to deal with the Fortune 100, Fortune 500. You are trying to solve for today is the mid-market, where you are seeing these entrepreneurial folks just exceeding at what they are doing, and you are just adding that additional layer to it, which is, to me, pretty phenomenal. How has that journey been, right? Like, in helping the mid-market, helping SaaS companies that are, these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, right? Like young entrepreneurs, right? You talk about some of the 3PLs, and you can name them, but I'll say some of these big names in the market, and then Shopify. And we understand Shopify's merchant base and who they are, and being able to help them in saying, let me give you a competitive chance for, cross-border shipping. You were talking about like how you guys, while everyone was struggling during the pandemic, you were able to almost guarantee the shipment from the Orient coming in, right? I think that's pretty phenomenal. I want to hear about the experience of being able to go from the big to now the mid-market.
Sure. I mean, we start off with the big companies, they have supply chain teams. Sometimes they outsource it to companies, but generally speaking, the big companies have a supply chain leader and, a team of people managing everything from PO placements and demand forecast to origin freight booking, ocean freight booking, all the way through to how do I manage my fulfillment centers and warehouses. SMBs don't have that, right? SMBs, small, medium-sized businesses, a few 100,000 of them. They are just scrappy entrepreneurs.
That's right.
And you can sit down and have this really interesting conversation about anything. You could talk to them about forecasting, demand planning, what's selling today, what's not selling today, how many units. They know everything, the full stack, but they know it just well enough because they only have an hour to spend on each thing, right?
Yeah,
and then that compounds into a 12-hour day or a 14-hour day.
Exactly.
And when you solve a problem for them, they say thank you. And they look you in the eyes and they mean it. And then you get addicted to someone looking you in the eyes and saying thank you. And, I remember my first few weeks at Amazon, I was going in this global trade organization that we really didn't have a business yet or an idea. And the first thing I tried to do as North American citizen is ship freight from China to a warehouse in the United States. First thing I tried to do. No one would return a call. No freight forwarder would return a call. No emails. No one wanted to talk to me. Finally, I got a couple of guys that did want to talk to me, but their English wasn't that great. Yeah. It was just the most painful process. This is 2016. And immediately I said, okay, wow, the complexity of this is massive, which is why a lot of SMBs rely on their suppliers to move their freight on their behalf. But then you start scaling and you realize that you have to take that over yourself. You need to be in your own, because there's a cultural gap in logistics between what a typical Chinese supplier would typically choose as a logistics path versus what a North American merchant needs to know that their inventory is on the way and when it's going to be there and so on. So there's a bit of a cultural bridge. And when we started the business, we had a theory was that not only is speed important, which speed was important, especially in those days, right? So we think over the pandemic, things were taking 75, 80, 90 days. There was so much port congestion. Things weren't trackable. There was so much noise in the industry that giving SMBs a way of getting it to where they wanted to get to, having visibility, and having reliability. So we had this great anecdote when we started selling the Flow product. We had a bunch of customers, and they were basically pushing F5 and refreshing the tracking data on the site. Flexport has great, amazing freight tracking. So they're pushing F5, they're refreshing it because they don't trust the promise. Yeah, right. A 20-day in Q4, Q1 last year, this year, trying to get your freight from Shanghai to LA Long Beach to your warehouse in 20 days is, and not on an airplane, is
on the ocean.
Of. Yeah. So no one,
and not even a full container, right? Yeah. I mean, this isn't like a
few pallets
container.
At a time.
A few pallets, right? Yeah.
Each person adds a few pallets, and you get a full load. And so they're tracking it. They're tracking it. They don't believe it. They don't trust us. And now we talk to customers who were around from that time and beyond, and they said they don't even track it anymore. They don't
know it's going to show up.
They just know it's going to show up. So going back, I said, speed was important, but reliability was more important. Knowing when it's going to get there allows the customer to plan ahead on their supply chain and say, if I know it's going to be 20 days or 40 days or 60 days, it's reliable, I can manage my POs, I can manage my cash flow according to reliability. That's something they haven't had in a couple of years, and they weren't used to it. But that couple of years is also when they went from this to this.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So they didn't really know a world. And, a lot of them quit their jobs. They had jobs before the pandemic. They left their jobs. They went full-time on the storefront. So now they're trying to navigate the complexities of marketing and supply chains, and they weren't able to predict their demand. And now we give them this reliable kind of service. And, some of the keys are, it's like one person to talk to. I don't deal with my supplier, an origin forwarder, an ocean forwarder, drayage provider, a destination warehouse, a bunch of cartage companies. I deal with one company now. And when we talk about simplifying everything for them, it's just like one phone number to call or one email address to go to. We're nice people, right? We'll call you back. SMBs are super important to Flexport. It's just been a nice growth period, and people trust us, and our partners trust us. Our friends at Shopify and SFN, Deliver, ShipBob, like Ship Hero, everyone's been great to work with because we solve their problems too. So we get them their freight reliably, on time. We schedule dock appointments. We send them advanced shipment notifications, and we make their customers happy so that they can be more successful and make our partners more successful. So partnerships has just been a really great kind of way to bring it to market. We're really fortunate. We had a few ideas that we launched in the meantime that didn't work. So it's not like, we hit every nail on the head. But, we want to be responsive. Things at the time, people were really focused on speed and reliability. Now people are starting to become a little bit more worried about cost.
Cost, yeah.
So now we're starting to edge downwards and trying to create reliable services that are cost. People are worried about trade financing and capital financing. Yeah. Cash flow is a real hard problem. So, we're leaning in on trying to be responsive and reactive to what the next year to 2 years is probably going to look like for SMBs, and launch new products that makes it simple. Get more thank yous out of them.
So what's Steve's unique perspective on what does the next couple of years look like, right? Like we were just, right before we started this podcast, we were bantering about that particular subject. It's like, what does the next couple of years look like? And yeah, you are absolutely right. Speed, reliability was the name of the game through the pandemic. Now this year, you are kind of seeing everyone is becoming cost conscious, right? And so what is the advice to the mid-market, to 3PLs that are out there, because you work with a lot of these 3PLs and they are talking to the merchants. So what's that cohesive message from your vantage point on where do we see the world going?
So I think in the short and medium term, the biggest problem I hear from our customers and non-customers is cash. Cash is king or queen, right?
That's right, yeah.
How do you best manage your cash flow? I can't find warehouse space, or warehouse space is really expensive. I don't know what this recession is going to do in terms of demand. I don't know how the big brands are going to position their sales in Q4, and if they're just going to take all the working capital from any disposable or discretionary income for the regular consumer, may just go to paying for, this new TV that's on sale for 60% off, right?
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of unknown as to how Q4 is going to work, and as such, cash is important. And how do you best manage your cash flow? In my opinion, similarly to how manufacturing supply chains move to just-in-time production, I think just-in-time fulfillment is a similar kind of approach. Ordering smaller quantities more frequently,
Yeah.
being more reactive to demand trends, making sure that you always got something in transit. You're not placing an order. Like a year ago, people would place an order for 1 or 2, 3 containers. They would sail, and you never really knew when they were going to get there.
Yep.
And then you store everything in a warehouse, and then whether it's going to Amazon or ShipBob or someone else, you kind of have your 3PL break up your inventory between the different channels, and you're sitting on $1 million worth of inventory until it sells.
And paying monthly for that warehousing, which is all spiked as well, too.
20% up or more this year, right?
Yeah.
So what I've found is some of my biggest thank yous, I guess, is when we enable people to ship more frequently but lower volumes. And they get to be more responsive and reactive. And then what they're doing is they're splitting East Coast and West Coast so that they're diversifying their risk. So they're not worried about whether it's port congestion or potentially a worker strike or a rail strike. They're moving their inventory to both coasts to get it closer to their customer so they can make a better promise to their end customer at a lower cost. Managing their cash flow, I think, is probably number one. Justin, he runs our capital program at Flexport. He made a good quote. It's like managing inflation these days is like trying to slowly pop a balloon, right? So he was showing me all kinds of graphs and charts, and his whole point is like if you have capital, double stack your credit. Get if you can get a bank loan, get line of credits, get a really good credit card. Just cash is going to be really important. If you have the opportunity, if you know something is going to sell, double your money into your marketing efforts. Whether it's your Amazon ads or your 3P ads on your other sites, make sure you're pumping that product as much and as fast as you can to sell it, because I think the next couple of quarters are going to be unknown. So being agile,
that's great advice.
Knowing what's going to sell and focusing on those products, and then working a really fast replenishment cycle, really, really key.
And, just speaking to the marketing side, unfortunately, the cost per click has gone up, right? So the cost of acquisition starting to go up as well as the marketing cost is increasing. It's a rough patch, and I think the true entrepreneurial hustle is what's going to kind of come in play over the next little bit. And to your point, Q4 results, right? It's not at the end of Q4. It's when the results for Q4 comes out. I think it could be like, oh, it's not too bad, guys. And the market kind of like says, okay, no problem. Or it goes, oh my Lord, all hell broke loose, right? So it's going to be interesting what ends up happening next year. I mean, and super great advice, Steve. From your vantage point, and given that you guys have like a capital side to it, to be able to speak to that, right?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, and I think, so a lot of people are talking about inventory softening. A lot of big brands have been canceling orders now for a while. I'm in a growth business. I'm still fairly new, right, with our programs, but we're not seeing that. So what we're seeing is people who are receptive to the idea of smaller batches of inventory more frequently, they're the ones that are doing well. I think the people who were responding to, oh my God, my supply chain is taking 90 days, it's volatile. I'm going to deploy a bunch of capital in January, February to make sure my inventory is in place in August so that I have it for November. I think those folks are really, so coming out of Q4, I think those folks are really going to have a hard time in Q1. I hope they don't, but...
but there is also the side to like order mins, right? So if you got a manufacturer in China, there is an order minimum that you got to just place. Like, what do you do? And it's, I think, negotiating, because inflation is not just a one country, two country problem, right? It's a global problem. And I think everyone is kind of seeing the impact of it. So another good idea is to renegotiate on the order minimums, right?
All the way on the
and all
front
the
end.
prices on
Yep.
the order mins, right? Like
Cash flow is important to them too.
absolutely.
Right, so we're not the only ones as merchant bases that cash flow is important to. The manufacturers and the trade agents over there, they all want cash as well. And minimums are a funny thing. Negotiating a minimum is usually just on a price. If you had 1,000 units before, you may pay a little bit more for 500 these days.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and the other side is the U.S. dollar is strong. So we have tariffs that came into place that hurt some potential resellability, but then we also have a very strong U.S. dollar, which is making purchasing power go up as well. So
Exactly.
I think it's definitely a delicate balance, but focus in on what the products are going to sell. Don't carry so many SKUs that may not sell. Replenish that stuff as fast as you can for costs. Because remember, the other thing is too, supply chain costs have gone down so much this year, 70%, 60%. So ocean containers, we saw a couple just peaking $20,000, and now a great service is like $6,000, $5,000 to $6,000 for
That's
a
amazing,
shipping
right?
to
To
LA.
2019 or pretty close.
Still like 30-40% higher.
Yeah. Okay.
Air is about $5 to $6 a kilo right now, so it's
Okay.
still 40-50% higher. Ocean shipping's still higher, but compared to
And it's
7
not
or 8
coming.
months ago,
It's not going to come down, right? Like I don't expect, like, do you expect it? It's like, look at the e-commerce market itself in general, right? So we got pandemic, everyone's like, oh, it's going to sustain, right? And we are out of the pandemic, at least, I think so at this point, right? And we are kind of back to above the pre-pandemic levels, right? But nowhere close to where we were year and a half, 2 years ago, right? From a numbers standpoint. And I think the same thing's applicable on some of this, the freight or air, right? Like, I don't think it's coming back all the way. I think people get used to that kind of finances as well, right? Like companies, and I don't think it's going to go back to, if it's 40% up, it's going to go back to 40% down to be able to kind of adjust, given the inflation in between. I think we're going to stay around 40, 30, in that range?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we'll see what the P&Ls and balance sheets of the asset carriers look like in a couple quarters.
That gives you more negotiation room, right, from your standpoint. Be like, hey, you making money, bro.
Sure. I think there's another. Law of supply and demand always trumps.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
Back in 2016, when I started at Amazon, I had a friend, I had never shipped anything freight before in my life. I had a friend who was moving. He wanted to take a vacation. He wanted to go to India for a couple months. And when he came back, he wanted to move into his new house. And he put all of his furniture into a shipping container and shipped it around the world. Because it was cheaper than putting it into storage.
Really?
So, like a fun little anecdote. So that was race to the bottom days.
Right.
And then, we had some shakeouts of that. Hanjin went under, and race to the bottoms are never good. But it's a funny anecdote to think that, that's how far, that was in 2016, right?
Yeah.
15, 16. So I don't think we'll go back down to those levels. But at the same time, I'm a technology guy, and Flexport technology company. Technology needs technology. And it's great, I think, for the entire world that some of the big carriers have been making good margins for the last couple of years because they've been struggling to invest heavy capital in technology. And, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of PDFs, emails, and phone calls are still prevalent in the industry globally. So I think the big carriers being able to deploy capital into solving technology problems and digitizing their interfaces and being able to give better tracking and adapt their shipping plans en route, all this technology needs mega investment. So, I have a lot of friends from Amazon who have gone to work for shipping carriers and trucking companies and things like that, bringing high technology approaches to, traditional industries. That has to continue. So I think reasonable margins for the next few years are important. We're about a year in to real capital deployment on these companies. VC market has been very, very friendly to, supply chain technology companies. Yep. We still need another few years.
Though that part's changing, right? The VC market's now kind of starting to look at it a little differently given the current environment, right?
A lot of differently. Across every technology.
Exactly.
But the wheels have started. So now we'll probably see some consolidation, some acquisitions and M&As, which is okay. I'm just happy that we're starting to see a technology approach to the foundational layer because there's only so much that a digital freight forwarder can do without the entire underlier being digitized. And so we're starting to see that, which is great. And I think that's better for everybody.
Absolutely.
That's going to create, Dave Clark, our CEO, was on a webinar the other day, and he said something that's important, which is digitization creates, that you can create automation once things become digitized.
Yeah,
and we haven't been able to create automation now as an industry as much as we should have in 2022. So I think the next 5 years is going to be really, really good. Sharing of data, sharing of ideas, changing things on the fly so things aren't quite so static all the time. It's going to be a great improvement to the industry.
Maybe keeping on that front and the fact that we're here together in Toronto, in about an hour or so going to be with a supply chain meetup we have here. And you're both from Toronto. I'm the outside guy, right? I'm the Pennsylvania guy here. But what are you guys seeing? Maybe a question for both of you guys as far as like the supply chain talent, product talent that's in Toronto. Like we're starting to see this swell of awesome talent in this metro Toronto area. And maybe just your thoughts on what you're seeing and what trends to expect over the next year or two.
You want to take that? Because I will have an opinion on that as well. But you want to take that from a supply chain tech talent? Yeah.
Sure. So we started Borderfree in 2000, and then we did Pitney Bowes eCommerce, Global Ecommerce head office was here in 2010 through 2016. And we could never find anybody with any supply chain background in those days. No one. There was just nothing that existed. So I think, you needed some companies to start it. And back in the day, the only stuff that happened e-commerce in Canada was cross-border. So, you wanted to buy Borderfree or any of the other plethora of cross-border e-commerce companies. But, 2013 to 2016, you started seeing a lot of investment. Amazon came in, dropped a bunch of fulfillment centers, opened a big office downtown, 2 big offices downtown, attracting real good tech talent and teaching people the foundations of operational engineering. So that really helped, I think, stoke the fires. But then a bunch of other companies came here too. And created diversified last mile delivery systems, fulfillment systems and technologies. I think the money came, the investments came, and Toronto's always been a really strong tech hub for a lot of really good tech talent. But the money was never there before to put them into supply chain work. So that's where I think a lot of it's coming. And we have a lot of great executives now. Canadian companies have also started really getting into e-commerce, especially during the pandemic. Canadian e-commerce wasn't that great before the pandemic. It was a do or die situation during the pandemic, and I think they've done great there. And I think it's just a great universe ecosystem that's been created in Toronto.
Yeah, I actually completely echo that, right? When, I've been around for a little while within the space. And
not 20 years yet,
Not
though.
20 years yet, yeah. So back in 2005-06 timeframe, when we stepped in, right, from a warehousing distribution, I'll say, the talent was fairly limited, right? But both the high amount of investment coming in from a lot of American companies, right, that said, okay, we are going to set up the kind of tech that we have in the US, in Canada, and also independent Canadian retailers and brands and whatnot, having heavy investment going into warehousing, distribution, supply chain tech, created this environment. And I think, today, as we will have the event, you will see a lot of people kind of emerged from that environment of enterprise grade tech environment. And to Steve's point, the pandemic helped accelerate, not just on the brand side, e-commerce side, right? Also on the tech side, first of all, the barriers to working and whatnot kind of started getting lifted. There was a recognition that there is talent here. Don't want to say it out loud, but Steve just said, the US dollar is strong. It's strong against Canadian dollar. I'm loving it. You know what I'm saying, right? So there is a bang for the buck. And there is a lot of talent, right? You got great universities like University of Waterloo, you got University of Toronto, Metropolitan Toronto University, the Ryerson University, and Shopify. You cannot
I was
talk
waiting
about
for Shopify to be
right?
mentioned.
What they ended up doing, again, a Canadian company, the amount of talent that started understanding the nuances of operational tech, right?
Product.
And that brought out a lot of talent, right? And I'm really hopeful in seeing where it goes. And not to say, right, in the US, there is some amazing supply chain tech hubs. Atlanta being one, right? Atlanta is super big. Chicago is another big hub, right, of supply chain tech. But I think the greater Toronto area, and I would go beyond that, bringing in Waterloo and Hamilton and some of these regions, we are seeing some massive investments coming in. VCs are opening up the doors, and there is a bang for the buck, and the talent's over here. And supply chain sexy, right? Like it wasn't sexy before, it's sexy now.
Yeah.
And a couple other things. I think there's a lot of really good federal tax credits for engineering here. That's
Absolutely.
one. Another one is the H-1B process in the U.S. got to be really complicated too.
You're absolutely
and a
right.
lot of really top talent came north of the border between Toronto. And we had, over the last few years, I've probably dealt with 20, 30 people, just top engineers who just couldn't make the H-1B work. So came across. So I think it's like
great for Toronto.
Bit of a perfect storm. Shopify Logistics, their head office is down in Waterloo, right? They're headquartered in Toronto and Ottawa region.
Shopify Plus, right? Like operates out of there as well.
Plus
Yeah,
does,
exactly. Yeah.
So I think there's now that they've gotten into logistics, it's certainly a really, really great bridge. But I think it's been great. I mean, we've always had strong tech talent. I think just there's always a domain that you want to develop that talent in, and I feel really confident and comfortable now with where we are.
Amazing.
My 2005 self is very jealous of my 2022 self.
We could all relive. Yep. Well, listen, Steve, this has been an awesome conversation. Really appreciate you joining us. And again, our first live in-person podcast. So
Thanks for having
really
me.
thrilled for it. Maybe to wrap things up, can you share where people could find more about Flexport? Maybe where they could follow you on social media?
Sure. Flexport.com.
Easy
Don't forget
enough.
about flexport.org is our really great humanitarian kind of cutting carbon emissions program. So they're great. But flexport.com, learn all about our different products, our full containers, air cargo, carbon offset programs, big heavy topic this time.
Absolutely.
Now they can start taxing carbon. So great program there. But overall, our partners are great too. If you're looking for a fulfillment partner, and Fulfillment IQ has got a lot of really good contacts out there. But shout out to our friends at Shopify and SFN. Deliverer, ShipBob, Shapiro, all those guys. So for sure. But flexport.com. Check it out. Social media, my name's Steve Bozicevic, Bozicevic for those phonetically not engaged in the Eastern European culture. But that's great. Gentlemen, thank you for having me on your inaugural live podcast.
Great to have you.
Thank you, buddy.
Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to maximize your supply chain. Available on all major podcasting channels. Thank you for listening and see you in the next episode.